ongoing our ongoing virtual series online, our speaker series. Is a pleasure, a real treat this evening to welcome Wendy Fishman and Howard Gardner. Welcome to you both. Professor Howard Gardner is the John H. and Elizabeth A. Hobbs Research Professor of Cognition and Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's also an adjunct professor of psychology at Harvard University and senior director of Harvard Project Zero. Among numerous honors, Gardner received a MacArthur Prize Fellowship and a fellowship from the John S. Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. In 1990, he was the first American to receive the University of Louisville's Grawemeyer Award in Education. In recognition of his contributions to both academic theory and public policy, he has received honorary degrees from 31 colleges and universities. The author of 30 books and several hundred articles, Gardner is best known for his theory of multiple intelligences, a critique of the notion that there exists but a single human intelligence that can be assessed by standard psychometric instruments. Professor Gardner, welcome.
Thank you, Danny.
We also have with us Wendy Fishman. Wendy is project director of Project Zero, whose mission is to understand and enhance learning, thinking, and creativity for individuals and groups in the arts and other disciplines. Wendy has written about education and human development in several scholarly and popular articles, addressing topics such as lifelong commitment to service work, inspirational mentoring, and teaching in pre-collegiate education. She is lead author of Making Good: How Young People Cope with Moral Dilemmas at Work, and she is the senior author of a forthcoming book tentatively titled The Once and Future College. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And returning this evening as our interviewer is Jamie Drucker, who is Assistant Director of Harvard Hillel. Jamie has been involved in education in numerous roles, including as a middle school teacher in rural North Carolina, working for Teach for America. She's taught in prison while pursuing her Master's of Divinity at Harvard Divinity School, and as one of her many hats in her current role as Assistant Director and my dear colleague at Harvard Hillel. Additionally, Jamie is a proctor, which is part of the broader educational apparatus at Harvard University. Jamie, welcome back. It's nice to see you. Just a reminder to everyone, we're going to begin with some questions from Jamie. At approximately 8:30, we'll begin taking questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, down below you should see a Q&A icon. Click on that and you can ask those questions. I'll be then communicating with you offline. Please don't ask the questions anonymously. We'd like to know who you are. We unfortunately can't address all the questions, but hopefully we'll be able to address yours. I will then be in touch with you and invite you to come on as a panelist. You can turn on your audio and your video and ask your questions to our panelists directly. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Donnie. Howard, Wendy, it's wonderful to share a Zoom screen with you. Howard, I have to tell you, I have a much overdue thank you. I received an email from you a couple weeks ago at 6 in the morning saying you found my Harvard ID. So thank you so much. I have been able to swipe in to the buildings because of your discovery, but you did put it up much higher than I can reach. I'm only 5'2", but thank you for recovering that for me.
True.
I would love to begin just by asking both of you to speak a little bit about the newest project that you've each undertaken together. You've done lots of work contributing to the field of education, but this new project about higher education in the 21st century, in which you've interviewed over 2,000 people across 10 different college campuses. So would you please tell us a bit more about some of the goals of this project and some of the findings of this research?
Wendy?
Okay. Well, as you said, Jamie, Howard and I embarked 8 years ago on a large study of higher education in this country, in which we involved 10 different campuses chosen because of their differences from one another. We interviewed 2,000 participants across the 10 campuses in 8 different stakeholder groups. So we interviewed students, graduating, faculty, administrators, parents, trustees, young alums, and job recruiters. Half of our sample were 1,000 students, and the other half were those other stakeholders that I just mentioned. And the goals of the project were exploratory. We didn't have any particular hypotheses. We wanted to understand how the different stakeholders described what the purpose of college is, what students should get out of the experience, what both inside the classroom and outside the classroom, what they should be learning and what kind of learning is most effective for them, and the kinds of problems they confronted on campus and how they manage these challenges. And we were interested in the alignments and misalignments in how people spoke about all of their views and perspectives. So for 5 years, Howard and I traveled to campuses many times and did interviews, 1 hour each with 2,000 participants. And then for the 2.5 subsequent years, we carried out in-depth analyses of these interviews. Often the analyses of one interview took more time than the interview itself. We had a team of researchers that helped us. We're now working on a book, as originally mentioned at the beginning of the session, to be published by Princeton University Press, called The Once and Future College, a nod to sort of honoring the original mission of college and thinking about the future of higher education based on what we learned. And I'll just give a few very quick headlines, and then Howard, please pipe in. But just to whet your appetite, what you read in the newspaper is not always what participants talk about. And so we listened very carefully to what participants described as their own goals for what students should be learning in college and what their experience should be like. We asked questions that elicited their own views and perspectives and not necessarily the headlines in the newspaper. Relatedly, campus tours don't always give insight about what's most important to students on campus. And we learned that very in a strong way. We also learned that students are more similar across all 10 different campuses than different. And we can talk about that in a little bit if you're interested. Howard, I don't know if you want to pipe in.
Well, that's a good summary. We have lots of opinions and lots of conclusions, but today I want to sharply distinguish those things which come from my data. One thing mentioned, Wendy, is students talk the same way, whatever kind of campus they go to. Another thing that we didn't expect is that mental health issues and belonging issues are very, very dominant, again, across various campuses. And as Wendy implied, academics is often taking a very back seat. And we coined the term projectitis because as we went all around the country, we found that as schools find new interests or new issues, new problems, they create centers, they create deans, they create sub-deans. And while this looks like an effort to respond to particular issues, in fact, what you have is mission sprawl. And the reason for our title, The Once and Future College, is not because we think college should go back to the way it was 100 years or 50 years ago, but now it's like a Wild West. There's so many things going on that people don't know why they're in college. And both Wendy and I can tell you how we know that they don't know why they're in it.
So would you be able to shed some light on that, both for the organizing bodies of the universities, but for the students themselves? Based on these conversations with stakeholders, how would you begin to articulate the purpose of higher education?
Do you want to take that, Wendy?
Sure. So Howard and I did not put our own agenda forward in the interviews that we conducted. We believe that the purpose of higher education is to help students to explore and to transform their own minds. And of course, in a traditional liberal arts and sciences program, whether students choose to major in humanities, the social sciences, the natural sciences, there are lots of choices, but whatever they choose, they should be given the opportunity to transform their mind. Most students that we spoke with, and even some faculty and administrators, did not necessarily know how to define liberal arts and sciences. We talk about the purpose of higher education if you're in liberal arts and sciences, should be non-vocational, to let students choose what they want to study, but also to help them change their thinking about things. We developed a concept, what we call higher education capital. We have nicknamed that HEADCAP as a short abbreviation. And it's our way to describe and assess the way that students think about things, the way they analyze topics, the way they synthesize different concepts, talk about differences between the past and the present and the future. And we hope that through a college education, students' head cap will increase over time. And in fact, that's one of the very good pieces of news in our study, is that we do find across all 10 schools, head cap does increase between students that we interviewed in incoming year and a group of students graduating year. But that's the main purpose of what higher education should be focused on.
Jamie, you want to follow it up?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to thinking about the purpose of education, you also speak very much in your research about having a very clear mission. So can you speak a little bit more about what you've learned about the importance of all learning deriving from a very succinct but also exemplifiable mission, especially against this challenge that you find of mission sprawl, where universities or colleges are taking on too much?
Okay.
What might it look like?
Let me talk a bit about that. We have found that beginning with the tours that students and parents take, academics is often completely in the back seat. People are showing off the buildings, they're showing off the dormitories, they're talking about all the opportunities you have off campus, and rarely is there a discussion of what courses you might take, what the faculty are good at, what the particular interests are in research. And so this is a message that this is really more like summer camp than it is like a place where learning should be taken seriously. We don't expect students to know this. We don't even expect parents to know this, but we've created two terms, and I promise you we won't throw more terms at you: onboarding and intertwining. Onboarding means from day one, from the day of admission to college, the administrators and faculty try to explain why you're in college. They may or may not use the word head cap. They may or may not use the phrases exploration and transformation, but the notion is you shouldn't be inertial, meaning you just shouldn't be there because you're there, and you shouldn't be transactional, meaning you shouldn't be there because you know beforehand exactly what you want, and you're not going to explore, and you're not going to be open to become a different kind of person, to think differently, to relate to different kinds of people, and so on. And the onboarding ideally should not take that long, but if it takes 4 years to get these messages across that this is an institution of learning, you take 4 years. Intertwining is that no matter what it is that people study, and we're very latitudinarian, we're very broad, and we don't try to dictate curricula, that the curriculum should be mind expanding. It should be increasing your head capital. And if the school has any other goal than strictly academic, it needs to be intertwined with the academics. And let me be concrete here. Wendy and I are very interested in ethics. We're also very interested in the arts. A school shouldn't try to take on all three of those things: liberal arts, ethics, and academics. But if it decides, and arts, but if it decides to take on ethics, that should be intertwined with the rest of the curriculum. It shouldn't be an outlier. One thing I thought about with reference to Hillel is, what about a religious or spiritual mission in a school? I will say, what everybody who knows me knows, I'm completely secular in my orientation, but I've become very admiring of schools which have religious or spiritual missions, as long as they're taken very seriously. One of our 10 campuses did. Another campus we spent on a lot of time on also did. It wasn't one of the 10 that we studied. And what we found is, when we asked students, what are you here for, that religious or spiritual mission came up. But, and here what I may say will be more controversial, I think if you have a religious or spiritual issue, it should be intertwined with the academic issue. Or you should say, look, I'm a religious school or I'm a vocational school. We're not trying to tell a dental school what to do. We're not trying to tell yeshiva what to do. But if you call yourself liberal arts or higher ed capital, then you owe us that you take that very seriously.
One of the ways that you reference that intertwining happens is the way in which the institution functions, but also the way that the faculty, the staff, and even senior members of the student community model the mission of the school. Can you give a little bit of an example or paint a picture for the way that this intertwining happens through the individuals who make up the school and live out the mission?
Sure, let me say a bit about this and then turn it over to Wendy. This is hard, and as I mentioned to Jamie beforehand, I've been at Harvard for 59 years, and I know it's hard here. Unless there's some agreement among faculty and senior administration about what the mission is, it's hopeless. You know, I think 100 years ago, there was much more agreement. In many ways, it's good that there was disagreement, but if you just have disagreement, you have what Wendy called misalignment, where you know, every different constituency wants a different thing, and that's just a recipe for disaster. So once you get some kind of agreement about what the most important thing is, what the school is here for. Let's use Harvard as an example. Veritas is our motto. Everybody knows that, whether or not they're at Harvard. If that's what you say your mission is, that has to be something that comes from day one. And whether you're teaching history or physics, or for that matter, philosophy or the arts or mathematics, you have to be concerned with what's true. Now, truth in one discipline isn't the same as truth in another, but then you say, well, what does it mean to talk about truth literally or metaphorically? When is truth not an appropriate description, and why? If you're doing religion, what's a religious truth? So you make it something that's in the DNA, it's in the bloodstream of everybody there. Otherwise, it's just a mission impossible, is what I call it. Wendy?
Well, I just wanted to add that based on our study, we learned that across 10 schools, about half of our students are transactional. And yet across all of our schools, almost 90% of our faculty are transformational. And so when we talk about a misalignment, that's what we're speaking about, that misalignment between students coming to school, believing that the mission is for them to do well, to get a job, to get a degree, to get a job, to move on to the next important stage of life. Where faculty, when they talk about what the purpose of college is and what the mission of college should be, they see it as a transformational experience. And so students need to spend more time with faculty, listening and learning from them. I think one of the main problems that we learned from faculty is that often students don't seek faculty out and they don't go to office hours. Faculty think their office doors are open, but students don't come. And so the question is, why is that not happening? And how can students and faculty find ways to have meaningful conversations about what college is and what it should be about and how they can structure their experience in meaningful ways, and so that this misalignment around mission doesn't exist the way it does. And I think that's why Howard describes what the importance of onboarding and intertwining is from day one.
Yeah, let me add just one point, because it's very dramatic. We're basically qualitative researcher, but with all these numbers, we can look at big data as well. I already mentioned that, or Wendy mentioned, that students use the same words no matter what kind of a school they go to. There's no difference at the individual word level. We compared the use of the word I with the use of the word we. I believe it was 9 times as many times students used the word I as they used the word we. And you know, you don't need to know much more than to if you want to realize it's not a community where people share their own view. We also looked at the word help. We were interested because we're interested in ethics, in to what extent students are interested in helping others. But we got a surprise, namely a very high percentage of students talking about help that they need. And this is where the mental health finding that this is the biggest problem universally, and the belonging problems, which are a tremendous challenge as well, really come to the core. If you don't feel a part of the community, if you don't feel part of we, if you don't have a mission in which you are joined, then it's kind of futile, it's hopeless.
Well, and actually, Howard, to follow up on that point, when we look at the word mission, It rarely comes up in student interviews. Students rarely talk about mission, but when they do, it's more of a personal mission. It's not an institutional mission. And actually, we had more cases where the word mission came up that was part of the larger word admission, not mission itself. So you can see what the frame of reference is for students in terms of where mission is important to them or not.
Given that we're about to embark on yet another, at least partially virtual semester at Harvard and shortly across the country for different campuses, the idea of what we means is being deeply challenged. These faculty interactions you're talking about, Wendy, are probably even more difficult for faculty, given that even if they are teaching courses, they're likely not holding office hours in the way that students are familiar with. So could you speak a little bit about some predictions you have about how mission or a sense of we, or particularly some of these issues concerning belonging and mental health, might manifest given another semester or year of virtual higher education?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I have predictions. I have 2 college students, myself, 2 juniors, identical twin boys that are about to go off next week to college. And my prediction is they'll be home sooner than they think they will be, but hopefully that's not correct. But certainly the current situation poses many challenges for higher education and for every sector in society. But why it might be counterintuitive, in some ways, it's possible that COVID and the situation with remote learning that exists now presents an opportunity for higher education to go back to the basics and to really focus on what's most important about higher education, which is transformation of the mind. And so Howard spoke about Project Titus at the beginning. There's so many programs, initiatives, clubs, centers on campus. And while so many have so many worthy purposes, they also can be distracting to students in some ways. And so this might be a time that higher education can get back to what its central focus should be, which we believe is on the academic experience. And as we've seen, there's lots of ways that people can connect on Zoom, even though it might not be as much fun as being on campus. But rather than focus on career centers and centers and gyms and Frisbee, which is what we hear a lot about, and also Netflix, which we hear a lot about from students, it could be that students really focus on academics, which should be the central aspect of higher education.
I would simply say amen. I think every sector has to either dissolve or figure out what's the most essential thing it does, whether it's law, journalism, medicine, finance. This is going to be a clearing away of places that are confused, that try to do too much. Just to repeat myself, the school doesn't have to present itself as a liberal arts school or as a general school or as a broad school. It can say we're making veterinarians, and then that's what they're going to be judged on. But if it claims to give a broad education, and that's been the genius of American education, we wouldn't have done this study if we weren't old enough to realize that all over the world, people wanted their kids to go to Amherst or to Swarthmore or to University of Michigan.
Maybe even Harvard, right?
Even Harvard. But by 2012, that was already declining. And by 2019, I think people who are watching, listening know that many people think higher education is bad for the country and would like to get rid of it. Somebody once said, "I love the poorly educated." I won't mention who that was. We need to look in the mirror and say, why are we here? And I think there are many ways, both virtually and in person, where we can show what it's like to explore, to be transformed, to think, as Wendy says, to be able to analyze and attend and reflect and synthesize and communicate. But if we try to do too many things, I mean, I'll give 2 facts about Harvard. Number 1 is there are 41 or 42 athletic teams, each of which has to be teamed. Second of all, somebody once did a calculation. There are 400 different clubs at Harvard, which means everybody can be the president. 1 out of every 4 can be the president. That's great in some sense, but neither of them has anything to do with why we have colleges or why we should have colleges. We should get a few questions from the participants.
Absolutely. I was just going to invite those. I have a quick reminder for those of you who are listening. Please feel free to type your questions down at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A, and please include your name so I'll be able to call on you and invite you to join our call. I would like to just take on this note of yours of exploring and reflecting and being transformed, to pull on some previous research of yours, especially Howard. In this time of virtual learning, what gleanings from this research that you've done extensively on multiple intelligences might be able to help faculty, but also help students be able to discern some of the most effective practices for their own learning and then demonstrating their learning in this virtual format?
Okay, I